I'm Madeline Johansson. You're watching The View on Alternative TV.
The travelling community faced discrimination and racism in various forms, but most starkly in relation to housing. Various acts of legislation, such as the Housing Act of 2002, have criminalised the traditional nomadic lifestyle of travellers. This, coupled with the lack of action to provide traveller-specific accommodation, has led to people living in substandard and overcrowded conditions. I spoke to Breda O'Donoghue, who is the chairperson of the Traveller Visibility Group in Cork, and Bridget Casey about their experience of accommodation for travellers. So, can you just tell me a little bit about your experience of overcrowding in particular in terms of traveller accommodation?
Yes, well, I suppose myself personally, I would have left Halton site 20 years ago due to overcrowding. I would have been one of the first residents onto the site when it opened, and from day one, it was overcrowded. We had at least 2 families on each bay, and that's 20 years ago. And I suppose to keep it more local, in Cork City alone, there's 4 traveller Halton sites, and there has been 4 for the last 30 years. Now, we have had 2 replacements, but there has been no addition to traveller accommodation. I mean, we have over 500 traveller families in Cork City, and if there's only 4 sites, where do people think the rest of them are, you know? They're living in rented accommodation, pretending that they're not travellers, in fear of the landlord finding out they're travellers because they'll be evicted. You have other traveller families then that's couch surfing in their parents' home, and you have some traveller families that's living in camper vans. I mean, we're on our 4th traveller accommodation plan here in the city, and there has been no provisions for traveller accommodation in any of those plans, and there's still no plan for any new additions to the accommodation here in the city.
And can you tell me a little bit about the conditions of those halting sites as well?
Okay, well, I can talk about Spring Lane. I know Spring Lane has been getting a lot of publicity over the last number of years. You have something like over 40 traveller families living in a 10-bay site in Spring Lane. The majority of those families don't have any running water, they don't have toilet facilities, they don't have electricity. You have, I think it's over 100 children living in that area. There's no play area. There's serious sewage problems. There has been E. coli found there a number of years ago. There's serious refuge around there. There's illegal dumping going on there, not by the residents in the site, but by other people. We have another site here in the city again. It's a 12-bay site, and there's at least 2 people on each bay. And when I say 2 people, I mean 2 families. And traveller families tend to be big families. You could be talking about an average of 6 children for each family using one unit where there's 1 toilet, 1 tap, and 1 shower. You know, so those are the conditions that travellers that are actually lucky enough to be on a site. Not a mind to the ones that's here that have no hard stand. Because of the Trespass Act, it's illegal for travellers to be nomadic and to live in a trailer. But if the local authorities aren't providing any traveller-specific accommodation, where do they think these people are going to live?
Now, you work with traveller accommodation. Could you tell me a little bit about the issues that a lot of traveller people would face in terms of accommodation?
I suppose in regard to travel accommodation, the issues that travellers face would be the lack of services, overcrowded issues, health and safety issues on halting sites, temporary sites for the last 20 years. The conditions are in a very, very despicable situations.
And has anything been changing over the last few years, either for better or for worse?
Well, there have been some progress in regard to travel accommodation, but not at the rate that we'd like it to see happen. Regarding Pacific travel accommodation, there's a lack of delivery from local authorities in delivering travel Pacific accommodation to meet the needs of cultural needs of travellers.
And what do you think needs to be done in order to rectify this?
I suppose, we have been sitting around the table for the last 18 years in regard to the National Travel Accommodation Consultative Committee and the Local Travel Accommodation Consultative Committee, but there is no outcomes for our people. There needs to be sanctions on local authorities to deliver and implement the travel accommodation programmes.
Following the horrific tragedy in Carrick Mines in 2015, where 11 people lost their lives, promises were made to improve housing conditions for members of the travelling community. But in the years 2008 to 2015, the funding for the traveller accommodation programme was cut from €40 million to only €4.3 million. To make matters worse, many local authorities spent a lot less than their allocation. In response to this crisis and the lack of action, the Travellers of North Cork group has launched an accommodation rights charter.
Yeah, so I suppose the reason we started this was so the travellers' voices would be heard. We started it back in September last year, where we would have met with local groups who wanted to see some change happen. So then we formed a group of researchers ourselves and went out and interviewed travellers in North Cork about their accommodation. So,
yeah, we interviewed 95 families over the North Cork traveller area. Surveys had been done before, but they assumed what should be done, what the travellers' rights were. So this time we involved the travellers directly, and we got their knowledge and experience of what their accommodation rights should be.
And can you tell me a little bit about what came out of that charter then and what you have written down here in terms of what is needed for travellers?
Yeah, we need transparency of budget. We need to see a decrease in the waiting list that travellers are on. Over a 10-year period, 29% of travellers, which is quite high, and only 1% was offered housing authority accommodation. So I mean, even from the statistics from the charter, we have three main issues here, as you can see. And our plan that we set up was make budgets transparent, deliver decent traveller Pacific accommodation, and respond effectively to problems. So that's what we're hoping. We've a 3-year work plan in place, and we're hoping that we'll work towards this and making sure our charter is acknowledged today.
And do you feel that in the past you haven't been listened to when issues like problems, as you said, that the problems haven't been responded to effectively by the council in the past?
Well, I think when speaking with the 95 travellers that we interviewed, one of the questions was, did they think that they were being listened to? And I think most of them said that they weren't. So we felt we needed to do something to change that and make some change.
The discrimination of it as well, both through the council and local authorities. We witnessed it from ourselves, do you know what I mean? It was actually from our own kind of backgrounds that we've gone through all this, and the discrimination we faced from them, it's just, there's no change in it. Even though we've got our ethnicity there in March, it's only a stepping stone really into what we do need. We need to face the council head on, we need to face landlords head on. There has to be change, and if we don't get change, we're going nowhere.
So we worked with the Travellers in North Cork to identify their priority human rights issues around accommodation. That involved them sort of starting from a position of selecting their priorities. So what are their accommodation needs that present the most challenges and are sort of the biggest levels of discrimination they face on a daily basis, raising their families in poor accommodation or on sites. Then we supported them to use an approach where they go out and monitor. So they went out and spoke with 95 other traveller families across the North Cork area, and essentially were able to establish a baseline picture of what conditions were like right now in 2017. The purpose of that is then so that they could go throughout the year to monitor whether the state is or is not dedicating resources, implementing programs which are meant to progress their rights or not. Because usually the state itself reports and says that things are getting better, or there's legislation or there's policies in place that are actually supposed to provide protections. But what the group presented today and have been gathering over the last 6 months provides clear evidence that those rights are being violated, quite evidently. So what the group plan to do is in 6 months' time and in 12 months' time, they'll return to those 95 families and they'll return back into the community to monitor again to see across those priority issues, are things getting worse, staying the same, or getting better? Because if things are getting worse, then the state is in violation of their right to housing. And so they'll not only be doing that, but obviously, as they've spoken before, to actually positively and proactively campaign around their charter. Because they want to bring this to the government to say, yeah, we're going to monitor you and we'll criticise you where it needs to be criticised, and we'll use the media, we'll use politicians, we'll use all the alliances we can use, but this is also about getting change. So we want to work with the state, they want to work with the council in order to progress this, but they're not waiting anymore. and they're not leaving it in the hands of the councillors who have failed them time and time again.
And do you think that the general housing crisis is exacerbating the problems that the travelling community are facing in regards to housing?
Yeah, PPR, the organisation I work with, works with a lot of homeless groups and housing campaigners across Belfast, Dublin, right across the north and in Edinburgh as well. And clearly there is a social housing shortage. And that obviously in terms of the whole austerity package impacts travellers, but there is a specific issue here to be addressed. And that is a historic one that exists today, and that is fundamental discrimination against the traveller community. That needs a separate solution that isn't lumped in with the broader social housing crisis, which is related to it, of course, but if we conflate those two together, the travelling community will get lost in that wider debate.